The shuttle arrived without ceremony. That was the first thing Calder Voss noticed. No escort formation, no honor drone, no advance signal from the Velkethori diplomatic channel. Just a battered Class 4 courier vessel dropping through the bay doors at Merak Station like an afterthought someone had remembered at the last minute. Its hull plating slightly misaligned on the port side in a way that made his eye twitch. He was standing at the upper rail of landing pad 3 with a calibration wrench in his hand and grease on his forearm, having just finished resetting the magnetic clamp array that the morning shift had, somehow, managed to torque 17 degrees off-center. Merak Station's chief mechanic did not normally greet diplomatic arrivals. That was Coordinator Feld's job, and Feld was currently in Conference Bay 1 explaining to a Trellari shipping consortium why their freight manifests kept disappearing from the system. So when the shuttle's landing struts touched down and nothing but one aide and a luggage unit emerged from the docking corridor ahead of the passenger, Calder stayed where he was. He noticed the misalignment on the hull again. Then the passenger came through the door, and he noticed her. She was tall, Velkethori always were, the species running ahead above most humans with four-fingered hands and the pale amber skin that was common to the outer ring populations of the Velkethori homeworld. Her hair was deep copper brown rather than the silver white that the imperial family famously wore, and her eyes were the warm, faceted gold of polished topaz, with the narrowed vertical pupils that widened slightly in the bay's moderate light. She was dressed in travel clothes, not court dress, a long-sleeved deep blue garment over fitted trousers, a battered shoulder bag that she carried herself instead of handing to the aide, and no imperial insignia that Calder could see anywhere on her person. She looked at the landing bay the way a person looks at a place they've been warned about and aren't sure what to think yet, assessing it, measuring the machinery, the sight lines, the distance between the fuel array and the docking arms. Not fearful, methodical. Calder's eye went back to the hull plating. He came down the stairs from the upper rail, crossed the bay floor, and stopped about 4 meters from the shuttle. The aide, a young Velkethori male, visibly flustered, clutching a diplomatic credential folio, turned toward him with an expression of profound relief at having found a human to hand a problem to. The 4th daughter of the Velkethori sovereign emperor, the aide said, and the title came out with the slight overpronunciation of someone reciting something they'd memorized on the flight over. Her Imperial Highness Sira Velorin Keth, here for the Station Integration Exchange, 7-month duration, per the accord signed at Muravel. I need to speak with your coordinator. Coordinator Feld is in conference, Calder said. I'll get someone to show you to the diplomatic quarters. He paused, and then, because it was genuinely bothering him, your hull is misaligned on the port side. 3-panel section, about 40 centimeters of incorrect seating. You've been venting slightly, not dangerously, but the cabin air would have been dry. The aide blinked. The princess, Sira Velorin Keth, 4th daughter, looked at him directly for the first time. How long, she said. Her standard was precise and unaccented. Looking at the oxidation line on the lip edge, I'd say 2 to 3 transit cycles. Whoever serviced this before departure missed it. He tilted his head. I can have it corrected while you're settling in if you want. She was quiet for a moment. The topaz eyes moved over him with the same calibrating attention they'd given the bay. Yes, she said. Thank you. She said it simply, without the formal register that Imperial Velkethori typically applied to interactions with station workers. Calder filed that away without knowing he'd done it, nodded once, and went to find a runner to take the delegation to their quarters. He fixed the hull plating himself, because the morning crew had already proven their limits today. The integration exchange had been running for 2 years. It was, as diplomatic programs went, functional, a rotating roster of Velkethori personnel embedded at Merak Station for 7 months at a time, learning human operational infrastructure, eating in the commissary, filing the same maintenance requests everyone else filed. The purpose, as the accord stated it, was mutual familiarity. The practice, as Calder had observed it, was that the Velkethori who came were generally mid-ranking functionaries who treated the assignment as a comfortable posting with decent food and no political exposure. He learned within 48 hours that Sira Velorin Keth was not a mid-ranking functionary. He learned it because she appeared in the workshop. Marak Station's mechanical workshop occupied a long section of the lower ring, adjacent to the fuel processing bay and connected by service corridor to all 6 landing pads. It smelled permanently of heat transfer fluid and ferrite dust, and it was lit with the flat, honest light that made every surface defect visible. It was not a place where diplomatic personnel typically went. The diplomatic quarters were on level 5. The commissary, the observation lounge, the recreation facilities, all on levels 4 and 5. The workshop was on level 2, and nothing in the integration exchange orientation packet suggested it. She walked in on the second afternoon, carrying a tablet and wearing the same practical clothes she'd arrived in. Calder was rebuilding the secondary actuator on a cargo loader, a task requiring him to be almost entirely inside the machine's left service panel, which meant he heard her before he saw her. The station schematics show this bay connects to the Pad 4 fuel line via the secondary conduit, she said, without preamble or introduction, as if picking up a conversation they'd been having. But the maintenance logs show the conduit was rerouted 14 months ago, and the schematics were never updated. Calder extracted himself from the panel and found her standing at his secondary workbench, reading his maintenance log display without having asked permission. He considered this for a moment, the reading without asking, the arrival without announcement, the specific technical observation delivered in the tone someone uses when they've already verified it twice. "That's correct," he said. "The schematics are in the exchange orientation materials," she said. "I've been cross-referencing them against the actual infrastructure as I walk through the station. This is the third discrepancy." He looked at her. "You're cross-referencing station schematics against live infrastructure." "The Accord assigned me to station integration," she said, and something in the word asterisk assigned carried the faintest weight that he couldn't quite parse. "Integration requires accurate information." She set the tablet down on his workbench, not a conference table, not an official briefing surface, and turned the display so he could read it. She'd mapped 3 errors in the schematic packet already, with notes in precise, abbreviated standard. He read the notes. They were good, not general observations, but specific ones, each one citing the schematic page number, the physical location, and the observed discrepancy with a measurement or a log reference. The third one, a mislabeled valve cluster in the environmental system, was something he'd been meaning to flag himself for 6 weeks and had not gotten around to because it wasn't yet causing a problem. "I'm Calder Voss," he said, "chief mechanic." "I know," she said. "You're on the station directory. You fixed my shuttle." "I did." She looked at the cargo loader, half disassembled in the bay, with the particular look of someone cataloging a system. "The actuator." "Secondary, shear point at the rotation coupling. It's the third one this quarter. The supplier's spec tolerances are too wide for our load cycles." He paused. "Why are you here instead of in a briefing with the logistics coordinators?" The question wasn't hostile. It was genuine. The integration exchange schedule was loaded with briefings for diplomatic tier visitors, operational overviews, policy discussions, formal meetings with every department head on the station. None of those were in his workshop on level 2, adjacent to the fuel bay. Sira Velorin Keth looked at the loader for a moment. "Because briefings tell you how a station is supposed to work," she said. "The workshop tells you how it actually works." Calder thought about that for a moment. It was the kind of thing that was obvious once someone had said it, and that almost nobody ever said. "There's a stool behind the secondary bench," he said. "If you're going to stay, you might as well sit." She sat. She watched him work with the same cataloging attention she'd used on the cargo loader, not idle watching, not polite observation, but the focused tracking of someone learning a system. When he explained what he was doing, she asked clarifying questions. Not performance questions, not the kind designed to demonstrate engagement, but the kind that came from actually needing the answer. She identified a secondary wear pattern on the actuator housing that he'd missed because it was obscured under the coupling shaft, a hairline stress fracture, early stage, invisible from the front approach. He'd been in the housing from the left panel and the angle was wrong. She was on the stool at the bench, looking at the housing from a position he hadn't been at, and she said, "There's a mark here, below the coupling mount left side." He looked, it was there. He marked it in the repair log. She watched him do it without comment. The 3 hours passed quickly in the way that time passes when two people are doing real work in comfortable proximity, neither of them interested in filling silence for its own sake. By the time she stood to leave, he'd finished the actuator rebuild, resolved 2 items on the day's maintenance list, and had a corrected version of the conduit schematic logged in the station record. When she left, she said, "Same time tomorrow." He said, "I'll be here." She came back the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the first week, it had the quality of a fixed thing, not discussed, not formally established, simply arrived at through repeated practice, the way a good operational habit establishes itself. She would finish whatever the day's diplomatic schedule required of her on the upper levels, and then come down to the workshop at mid-afternoon, bag on her shoulder, tablet in hand, and sit at the secondary bench. She was never underfoot. She was never loud. She was simply there, observing and asking and occasionally pointing at something he'd missed, and the work was better for it in the specific, measurable way that things are better when a second set of precise eyes is present. He noticed that she moved through the station differently than the other exchange personnel he'd seen over the years. Most of them kept to level 4 and 5, the diplomatic quarters, the commissary, the meeting rooms, the observation lounge with its view of the transit lanes. The station's working infrastructure was below and lateral, threaded through the lower ring in a way that didn't intersect with the official program. She went everywhere. He'd catch sight of her in the loading corridor or the service passage toward the fuel bay, tablet in hand, reading the physical environment against the schematic. She filed 3 infrastructure correction reports in the first week through the station's administrative system. They arrived on Coordinator Feld's desk attributed to Exchange Liaison Level 5, and Feld had forwarded them to Calder with a message that said, "These are surprisingly detailed. Did you talk to the exchange visitor?" Calder had replied, "She talked to me." He pieced together the shape of it over the following weeks, in fragments. The integration exchange selected participants from approved Velkethori candidates, and the Emperor's office had final sign-off on any member of the imperial family who went. The Emperor had 4 daughters. Sira was the youngest by 11 years. The 3 elder daughters were on the Imperial Council track, in political education at the capital, groomed for succession roles or strategic alliance marriages. Sira was, according to the diplomatic background file that Coordinator Feld had eventually located and shared with Calder at Calder's request, assigned to technical liaison work in outer ring human stations, a phrasing that didn't mean technical liaison work. He understood the phrasing when Feld said it out loud, and then looked slightly uncomfortable. "The file says she's 4th in succession," Feld said, "which isn't nothing, but with 3 older sisters ahead of her and the Emperor." He cleared his throat. "She was apparently sent here specifically. The Emperor's office selected Marak Station for her." "As opposed to the capital-adjacent exchange postings," Calder said. "As opposed to, yes." He sat with that for a while, then he went back to work. She appeared in the workshop every afternoon. They had, without negotiating it, established an arrangement. She cross-referenced station infrastructure documents against what she was physically observing and brought the discrepancies to the workshop. He corrected the records, filed updated schematics, explained operational history. She was learning the station from the inside out. Not from the briefing packets, from the pipes and the conduits and the load-bearing structure. At the end of the third week, she said, "You have a latent pressure differential in the pad 1 fuel line. It's small, but it'll cause a false negative on the fill sensor within about 60 days. He ran the diagnostic. She was right. "How did you find that?" he said. "The fill rate is 0.003 cycles slower than it was 6 weeks ago, based on the log records. The sensor reading shows no flag. That means the discrepancy is coming from something upstream of the sensor, not the sensor itself." She looked at him with those warm topaz eyes. "I've been reading your maintenance logs. I have about 8 years of records in there." "Yes," she said, and didn't seem to think this was excessive. He sat down on the work stool. "How long have you been doing this?" he said. Not an accusation, a real question. Reading infrastructure, tracking discrepancies. She was quiet for a moment. In the particular way she was quiet when he asked something that required honesty instead of information. "Since I was 12, she said. "The capital's infrastructure has maintenance records going back 140 years. I read them when I was supposed to be in protocol lessons. And nobody put you in an engineering track. The fourth daughter of the emperor doesn't go into an engineering track," she said, with the same flat evenness she used to report valve cluster locations. It was the same tone, the one she used for things that were facts and not grievances. He thought about the hull plating on her shuttle, the misalignment 2 to 3 transit cycles, the dry air, the fact that she'd arrived alone with 1 aide and 1 luggage unit on a battered courier vessel. He went back to the pressure differential. Her name, he learned from the cultural integration packet, which he'd finally read in full, meant something closer to clear water in formal Velkethori. The cultural packet said Velkethori names for imperial children traditionally carried an aspirational quality, a desired trait, a hope impressed into the syllables. The 3 elder daughters were named for things the emperor valued: strength, legacy, radiance. The 4th one was named for something simpler. He'd have to ask her about it sometime. He wasn't sure yet exactly how to ask. What he knew was this: she worked. She worked with the kind of focus that was easy to miss because it didn't perform itself, didn't announce anything. She simply came in, sat down, looked at what was in front of her and understood it. He'd had crew members, good ones, experienced ones, who never developed the particular intelligence that she carried like a natural condition. The ability to look at a system in operation and understand not just what it was doing but what it was about to do, where the stress was accumulating, where the tolerance was running thin. By the end of the 4th week, she had cataloged 14 infrastructure discrepancies, corrected all the station schematics in the exchange packet, flagged 2 maintenance issues that weren't on anyone's active list, and spent an afternoon helping him track down an intermittent fault in the environmental controls on level 3 that had defeated 2 of his junior techs for the better part of a month. She found it in 4 hours. A feedback loop in the secondary thermostat sensor, triggered by a specific sequence of load conditions that nobody had thought to map. She drew the sequence on the workbench whiteboard in a diagram that was clear enough he photographed it and put it in the training reference file. She didn't comment on this. She just washed the whiteboard marker off her hands and asked what he was working on next. One of his junior techs, a young man named Preble who had been trying to figure out what to make of the imperial visitor in the workshop since day 1, stopped Calder in the corridor one afternoon and said, with the directness of someone who has been puzzling something out, "She's really good." "Yes," Calder said. "Like not diplomatic exchange guest good, actually good." "Yes." Preble chewed on this. "Does she know how good she is?" Calder thought about that for a moment, about the flat evenness in her voice when she described facts she'd made peace with. "I think she knows how good she is," he said. "I don't think anyone else has told her." 5 weeks in, the cargo docks had a problem. It wasn't a dramatic problem. No explosion, no structural failure, no emergency klaxon. It was the quieter, grinding kind of problem that accumulates over time and eventually costs money. A loading arm on Dock 7 was developing an oscillation pattern in its extended reach position that had already bent 2 cargo struts and was threatening the precise alignment tolerances needed to mate with Class 6 freight vessels. The arm had been checked 3 times by the dock maintenance crew. The fault report said no fault identified each time. The Trellari Consortium, the same one that had been giving Coordinator Feld trouble about manifests, had 2 Class 6 freighters scheduled for the following week. If Dock 7 couldn't guarantee tolerances, the docking would have to be shifted to Dock 4, which was booked, and the whole schedule would compress in a way that was going to cost someone significant money and diplomatic goodwill. Calder pulled the arm's maintenance records and spent 2 evenings going through them. He found the servicing history, the inspection reports, the replacement log. The oscillation wasn't in the records anywhere, which meant it had developed recently and quickly, which pointed to something mechanical rather than a software fault. He was halfway through the oscillation frequency data when Sierra appeared at his elbow, having come in after dinner when the workshop was quiet. "You're looking at it wrong," she said. He turned to look at her. "The arm's oscillation frequency is consistent," she said, "but the amplitude varies. If it were a mechanical imbalance, the amplitude would be consistent too. The variance means the input is inconsistent." She pulled up the adjacent data column on his screen without asking. "The power delivery cycle. It's not the arm. It's a brownout in the power feed, too small to trigger the fault monitor, but enough to cause the servomotor to micro-stutter." He looked at the power delivery data. The variation was tiny, 0.1%, but it was there, and it was periodic. "The feed runs through junction 9C, he said, already standing up. "That junction's been running at full capacity since the new Trellari freight schedule started. I should have checked it first." "You thought it was the arm," she said. "It presented as an arm problem." "It presented as an arm problem," he agreed. They went to junction 9C together, Calder with a diagnostic scanner and Sierra with her tablet. The junction was running at 98.3% rated capacity and had been for 6 weeks. The overcurrent protection was sound, but the voltage regulation was barely managing, and at peak load the fractional drops were enough to cause exactly the microstutter she described. He redistributed the load to junction 9A in 40 minutes. The oscillation disappeared. He had Dock 7 back online with full tolerance certification before midnight. The Trellari freighters would dock as scheduled. Standing in the dim junction corridor afterward, scanner in hand, he looked at her. She was reviewing the redistribution data on her tablet, making a note. "You came in after dinner," he said. "You had the oscillation data on your screen when I left yesterday," she said, not looking up. "I thought about it at dinner, the variance pattern." "You thought about it at dinner." "It was bothering me." He almost said something. He didn't. They walked back to the workshop in comfortable quiet, and he wrote up the junction report, and she stayed until the report was done, reading the load records for the other junctions with the systematic attention she gave to everything. When she left, he sat for a while in the empty workshop. He'd been chief mechanic at Marek Station for 6 years. He'd been a mechanic before that, on 3 different stations for 8 years before that. He knew good technical minds, he'd worked with them, trained a few of them, valued them. He knew the specific quality of someone who could hold a system entire in their head, turn it, find the weak point. He'd met maybe 5 people in 14 years of work who had it the way she had it. She had it like breathing. And she'd been sent here to a Class 3 outer belt station, on a battered courier shuttle without ceremony or escort, as an afterthought. He turned off the workshop lights and went to bed, and lay awake for longer than was typical. The diplomatic formal dinner was in the 6th week. It was Coordinator Feld's idea, and it was, as Feld explained it, standard procedure for long-term exchange visitors. A station-side event in the Level 5 reception hall, dress optional, intended to allow the diplomatic personnel to meet station leadership in a social rather than functional context. Calder was invited because Feld had apparently decided that Calder was, at this point, a relevant point of contact. Calder wore the clean version of his station jacket and arrived on time, which put him among the first 6 people in the room. Sira arrived with the aide and 2 of the station's administrative staff, who had been assigned to accompany her to official events. She was wearing a formal Velkethori garment, long, in a deep bronze that picked up the copper undertones of her hair, with a simple metal piece at her collar that carried no imperial markings and could have belonged to anyone. She looked different. Not more herself, differently herself. The formal register a second layer that didn't quite fit the same way the workshop clothes did. She found him across the room almost immediately. He'd been aware of the door and was already turning when she came in. He crossed to the drinks table, picked up the fizzing citrus drink that the station stocked for mixed-species events. He'd seen her choose it in the commissary 4 times in the past week, and brought it to her. She took it without making anything of it, which meant she'd noticed that he'd noticed, and neither of them needed to discuss it. She looked slightly relieved to be holding something specific, the way people do at formal events when they'd rather be doing actual work. They stood at the edge of the reception hall and the conversation went, almost immediately and without either of them steering it there, to the environmental system on Level 3, the one she'd fixed, which had surfaced a secondary issue in the adjacent ductwork that neither of them had gotten back to yet. She'd been thinking about the ductwork fault since Tuesday, she said, because the symptom pattern didn't match the obvious failure mode, and she wanted to walk the physical path before forming a conclusion. He'd been going to suggest that anyway. They agreed they'd do it Thursday, after the morning load cycle. Coordinator Feld came by once with 2 station administrators in tow, made introductions, stayed for 4 minutes of professionally pleasant conversation about the exchange program's progress, and moved on. He came back 9 minutes later with a representative from the Trellari Consortium and stayed for 6 minutes. When he moved on the second time, his expression was that of a man who had organized a diplomatic social event and found 2 of his primary participants discussing ductwork and was uncertain whether to be relieved or concerned. "He thinks we should be discussing trade policy," Sira said, after Feld's second pass. "Probably," Calder agreed. "I know trade policy," she said. "I studied it for 6 years." A pause. The Velkethori 4th succession track includes it in the policy rotation. 3 years of political structure, 2 of economic framework, 1 of interspecies diplomatic history. She looked at the room with the same calibrating attention she turned on infrastructure, measuring, noting, not performing interest she didn't feel. "I find the ductwork more interesting." "You find everything about this station more interesting than the formal program," he said. "The formal program tells me what Marak Station is supposed to be," she said. "The station itself tells me what it is." She looked at him with the topaz eyes. "Those are different things, usually by a significant margin." He thought about that. About the specific satisfaction of the distinction, the supposed and the actual, which was the distinction his entire working life had been built around. The schematic and the physical reality. The spec and the operational truth, the maintenance record and the wear pattern on the coupling mount. He'd never heard anyone put it quite that way before. "Tell me about the name," he said. She turned to look at him. "Which name?" "Yours." I read the cultural packet. "Names in the imperial family are aspirational. The 3 elder daughters," he paused. "I didn't see a meaning listed for Sira." Something shifted in her expression. Not hurt, something older than hurt and quieter. "It means clear water," she said. "Informal Velkithari. That's different from the others." "Yes," she looked back at the room. "My mother chose it. She died when I was 3. My father named the others strength, legacy, radiance. A beat. He named me for a thing my mother valued. He didn't choose it himself." Calder was quiet. "He did not find it an aspirational quality," she said, with the flat evenness she used for facts. "Clear water is transparent. Clear water is plain. It doesn't hold weight the way the others do. He sent me to outer ring postings because the outer ring is where things that don't fit the center get placed." He looked at her profile, the copper hair, the warm amber skin, the topaz eyes that were looking steadily at the middle distance. "Your mother knew something," he said. She turned toward him. "Clear water," he said. "You can see through it, all the way to the bottom, no distortion." He held her gaze. "That's how you see everything, the hull plating, the pressure differential, the oscillation that looked like an arm problem and wasn't." He paused. "That's not nothing. That's the thing that makes everything else work." She was very still. He'd said more than he usually said. He was aware of that. He was also aware that he meant it with the specific, grounded sincerity of someone reporting a diagnosis, not a compliment offered to fill space, but a fact he'd arrived at through evidence. "Nobody has explained it to me that way," she said. "No. No." The formal dinner continued around them. Feld circled back with a Trelari shipping liaison and made introductions, and Calder made the appropriate professional conversation, and Sierra made the appropriate diplomatic conversation, and later they moved to opposite sides of the room for a period, and then the evening ended. He walked back to the lower ring alone and stood in the workshop for a few minutes in the dark, not turning on the lights, just standing. The second half of the exchange moved differently. Not because anything was said, nothing particular was said. But there was a different quality to the time in the workshop, a slightly different gravity, as if the center of it had shifted fractionally and everything was reorganizing around the new position. She still came every afternoon. He still explained, and she still found things he'd missed, and they still worked through the maintenance backlog together in a way that had, quietly, become the most productive working partnership he'd had in years. But there were other things. She started staying later. The junior techs left at shift end, and she didn't. Not every evening, every third or fourth one, extending past the obvious work reason into the quiet hours when the workshop was just the two of them and the low hum of the station systems and the flat, honest light over the primary workbench. Preble noticed first. Preble always noticed things. It was both his best quality and his most exhausting one, and said nothing, which was more telling than if he'd said something. They talked more. Not just about infrastructure, though infrastructure remained the native language they defaulted to when conversation needed a concrete anchor. She told him about the capital, the political architecture of the Velkithori court that she'd studied from the outside in, always more interested in how the structures actually functioned than in her place within them. The court had its own kind of maintenance requirements, she said, its own failure modes and stress points and accumulated workarounds. The difference was that at court, the workarounds became policy, and the failure modes became tradition, and nobody logged them. He told her about stations, the 3 before Marak, each one a different operational character, each one teaching him something about the relationship between a station's design intent and what it actually became over years of use. The first had been too new, everything working too well, no history to read. The second had been too old and badly managed, the maintenance logs a record of accumulated shortcuts that had become load-bearing. The third had been right, enough history to have texture, well enough run that the records were honest. He told her about Marak, how he'd arrived 6 years ago to a crew that was adequate and a maintenance record that was an afterthought, and how 6 years of consistent work had produced a crew that was good and a record that was genuinely useful. He hadn't described it that way to anyone before. It came out simply because she listened the way she did without performing the listening, without preparing her next point. She just took in what he said and let it be what it was. He told her that once in his second posting, he'd caught a fuel cell fault at 3 a.m. on a routine walkthrough that, if it had gone another 8 hours, would have taken out the station's lower ring entirely. He'd sat with that for weeks afterward, the knowledge of what almost happened, the narrow margin between a routine night and a disaster that would have ended the station entirely. She listened to this with her full attention. "You stayed," she said. "You were doing a walkthrough at 3 a.m. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "I kept thinking about the load cycle on the fuel array. Something felt off." "Something felt off," she said. "I couldn't explain it, he shrugged, went and looked." She was quiet for a moment, not the polite quiet of someone who has heard enough and is waiting to speak, the quiet of someone holding a thing up to look at it properly. "I know that," she said finally. "When something is accumulating incorrectly, you can feel it before you can see it, before the data shows it." "You can feel it before you can see it," he agreed. They looked at each other for a moment too long to be comfortable, and not long enough to be an answer. He broke it first, turning back to the actuator housing he was working on, because he had a discipline about these things that he applied with the same consistency he applied to maintenance schedules. But the moment sat with him. He found himself thinking about it in the plant room the next morning while running the junction load review, which was not a task that required thinking about anything except junction loads. He shut the thought down with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been doing this kind of mental maintenance for a while, filed it under * operational data, pending, and went back to the junction loads. The junction loads were not interesting enough to hold his attention the way they normally were. He ran the review twice. 3 weeks before her assignment ended, she brought him something. It was a technical document, 53 pages, formatted in formal Velcathori notation and translated into standard, covering Marak stations' infrastructure discrepancies, corrected schematics, predictive maintenance flags, and a full load cycle analysis for the junction network that modeled failure probability over the next 2 years and recommended a graduated upgrade schedule. She set it on the workbench. He picked it up and started reading. It took him 20 minutes to read the executive summary. He kept stopping because the density of it was extraordinary, not because it was complicated, but because it was *exact, every observation grounded in the specific data she'd pulled from the maintenance logs, every recommendation traceable to a real failure pattern, every projection annotated with the assumptions it rested on so that anyone updating the analysis later would know what to adjust. "You've been working on this," he said. "Since the 4th week." He looked up from the document. "This is a complete infrastructure audit." "Yes." "For a station you've been assigned to for 7 months." "Yes." He looked back at the document. The junction upgrade schedule, he found the section. "You've prioritized by failure probability and cross-referenced with freight scheduling to minimize operational impact. A station can't take a junction offline during peak load cycles," she said. "The upgrade has to sequence around the throughput calendar." He turned to the section on the pad 1 fuel line, the pressure differential she'd caught in week 3. She traced it back to its root cause, a pipe segment installed at slightly below spec thickness 8 years ago, and had calculated the accumulated fatigue stress. The timeline on the pressure differential becoming a real problem was between 14 and 22 months, depending on load. The document recommended a targeted pipe replacement in the low-traffic window 3 months from now. 14 to 22 months, he said. "I've been tracking the rate," she said. "The degradation has been consistent." He looked at her. She was standing on the other side of the workbench with her hands loose at her sides, watching him read, and her expression was careful, not guarded, careful, like someone who has made something they cared about and is waiting to find out what it's worth to the person they made it for. "Zero," he said. "Yes." He set the document down flat on the workbench and spread his hands on top of it, pressing it down like he was making sure it was real. "This is real work," he said. "This isn't an exchange attachment report. This is a full audit." He held her gaze. "I'm going to send this to the station director. I'm going to send it to the procurement office for the junction upgrade. I'm going to put it in the station maintenance archive as a baseline document for the next 10 years. Something in her face moved. Not emotion spilling over, she didn't operate that way, didn't flood. A small, specific change, like a reading on a precise instrument shifting into the range it's been calibrated to recognize. "The fourth daughter of the emperor doesn't usually produce station maintenance documents," she said. "No," he agreed, "she doesn't." They were quiet for a moment. "What does the fourth daughter of the emperor usually do?" he asked. She looked at the workbench, at the document under his hands. "Wait," she said. "In the capital, attend functions, be present at things." A pause. "My sisters are excellent at that. I've never been." "You're good at this," he said. "I know," she said. And then, with something that wasn't quite humor but was adjacent to it, "You're one of 3 people who have ever said so." "Who are the other 2? "My mother's head engineer, who let me follow him through the capital's utility systems when I was small, and a structural analyst who reviewed a paper I wrote in my first technical rotation and told me it was the most thorough predictive failure analysis he'd read from a first-year student." She paused. "He was also the one who told me the track was closed to imperial daughters." Calder looked at the document on the workbench. At 53 pages of careful, exact, thorough work that had been done in the margins of a diplomatic assignment, in an outer ring workshop, without anyone asking for it, because something in her couldn't stop looking at a system and wanting to understand it completely. He was aware, with the same clarity he had when a fault presented itself, that he was at a decision point. "It shouldn't be closed," he said. She looked at him. "I don't care about the emperor's track list," he said. He was not typically a man who made speeches. What he said instead of speeches was clear and specific, because that was the way he knew how to mean things. "What you can do is real. It's demonstrable. I've watched you work for 12 weeks. The audit is not a side project, it's what you're for. Whatever role they put you in the capital after this, whatever function they think they're assigning you to," he stopped, started again. "You should be doing this." She was very still. The topaz eyes were on him, and they were reading him the way they read a maintenance log, all the way through to the base assumption. "You mean that?" she said. "I mean it." "You're not," she stopped, started differently. "In the capital, when someone says a thing like that, they want something. The statement carries a request inside it." "I don't want anything," he said. "I've got a station that runs better because you've been here. You found 7 faults I didn't know about. You're going to save this station somewhere between 60,000 and 200,000 credits over the next 2 years with that pipe replacement flag alone. That's just what happened." He held her gaze. "The statement doesn't carry anything. It's just true." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Nobody says things to me that are just true." And he understood then the weight of it. The capital, the court, the functions and the appearances, the father who had named her for something he didn't value, the sisters on their inheritance tracks, the structural analyst who told her the door was closed, the battered courier shuttle and the dried cabin air, and the 7 months at the outer edge of the station network, where the work was real and the audience was zero, and the document had been made anyway, 53 pages of exact, careful truth, because she couldn't do anything else. "I know," he said simply. 2 weeks before the end of the assignment, he did something he'd been thinking about for a while. He pulled her into the Level 2 plant room on a Tuesday afternoon. Not the workshop, the plant room, which was the terminal point of the main utility spine and the most honest cross-section of the station's internal workings anywhere on the ship. And he showed her the master junction map on the physical display panel, the one that only the senior maintenance staff had access to. "I want to show you something," he said. He walked her through the full junction network, the way he understood it, the history and the failure modes and the places that had been problematic and why, the repair decisions and the trade-offs and the shortcuts that had been made over 15 years of operational history. He showed her the sections of the audit she'd written and where they fit in the larger picture. He talked for almost 2 hours, and she asked questions throughout, sharp and specific, and he answered them all. And by the end of it, the map had new annotations in both their handwriting, a physical record of a conversation that had added something to the station that hadn't been there before. When they were done, she stood looking at the annotated map. "You'll take this document seriously," she said, "even after I'm gone." "The document doesn't need you here for it to be correct," he said. She looked at him. "But it needs me here for you to have written it," he said. That wasn't what he'd meant to say. It was true, but it was true in a direction he hadn't planned to say out loud, and he felt her hear it, felt the slight shift in the air between them, the small recalibration. "Yes," she said, "that's correct." They looked at the map. "I don't know what the capital is going to do with me when I go back," she said. It wasn't a complaint, it was the same flat, factual register. "There's no formal track. The Emperor didn't design one. I've been on outer ring postings for 3 years and I'll probably be on them for 3 more. Outer ring isn't a bad thing," he said. "The work here is real." "I know that now," she said. She turned to look at him, and there was something in the topaz eyes, not the calibrating attention, something different, something that had moved past assessment into something more personal. "I didn't know it before I came here. I thought it was the place they sent people they didn't want." "It is the place they send people they don't want," he said, "and also the place where the actual work happens." Something that was almost a smile. "You're good at saying things that are exactly right," she said. "I'm not good at saying things at all," he said. "I just don't say the ones that aren't right." The last week arrived the way last weeks do, with the weight of an ending that nobody has negotiated, that has simply been baked into the timeline since the beginning. The aide began preparing departure documentation. The luggage unit was retrieved from storage. The workshop filled up with the ordinary tasks of the station in their ordinary rhythm, and Sierra came every afternoon and they worked through them, and nothing was different on the surface, and everything was. On the second to last day, she came in late after dinner, later than usual, and she didn't sit down at the secondary bench. She stood in the center of the workshop in the way someone stands when they've decided to say something. He put down the calibration tool he was holding and waited. "I want to tell you something," she said, "because you said things to me that were just true, and I want to do the same." He looked at her. "I came here expecting nothing," she said. "That is the correct word, nothing. My father's office selected Merak Station specifically. The outer belt postings are where they put things they want to forget about. I've had 3 of them. This one I came to on a shuttle with a misaligned hull panel that had been misaligned for 3 cycles and nobody had bothered to fix." She held his gaze. "You fixed it on my first afternoon, without being asked, because it was wrong." He said nothing. "You showed me the maintenance logs," she said. "You let me sit at your bench. You told me what was real about this station, not what the packet said." A pause. "In 12 weeks on an outer ring posting that my father designed to mean nothing, I did more real work than in the previous 3 years combined, because you treated the work as real, and you treated me," she stopped, started again. "You told me I was good at this. You put my analysis in the station archive. You argued in the plant room that the work should carry my name because I wrote it." "It should," he said. "I know," she said, and the line came back to him, his own words returned to him. And that is not something I knew 3 months ago. He was quiet. She looked at him with the full attention she gave everything. The topaz eyes reading all the way through to the base assumption, the way she'd looked at the hull plating and the junction map and the oscillation data, and all the things that told the truth if you knew how to read them. "I'll go back to the capital tomorrow," she said, "and I don't know what comes after that. But I want you to know that this is the first posting, the first place, where the work meant what I needed it to mean." He crossed the workshop floor. Not quickly, not the way you cross a space in an emergency. The way you cross a space when you've decided, when the calculation has run and come back with the same answer twice, and you know it's correct. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin slightly to keep the eye contact. "You'll be back," he said. "You don't know that. The outer ring doesn't let go of people who are good at it," he said, "and you're too good at it for the capital to waste you on functions forever." He paused. "And I'll make a case." She looked at him. "You'll make a case?" "To whoever I need to make it to." He meant it as simply as he meant everything, not a grand declaration, a statement of intention, grounded in the same specific certainty he applied to a maintenance decision. 7 months isn't enough. The audit is a baseline document. It needs someone who can read the data as it accumulates. The station needs. "Calder," she said. "Yes." "Stop making the technical argument." He stopped. The workshop was quiet around them, the station's hum a low constant, the light flat and honest on every surface. "What argument do you want?" he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "The one that has nothing to do with the audit," she said. He let out a breath. "You should stay," he said, "not for the station." For he looked at her. "There's no audit language for this one." "No," she agreed. "I don't want you to go," he said. "That's the one that has nothing to do with the audit." She was very still. The small, precise instrument shift in her face, in the set of her shoulders, the particular quality she had when she found the thing she'd been looking for. "I'll speak to my father's office," she said, "about an extended technical assignment." And then, more quietly, "The Emperor sends things to the outer ring because he doesn't want them. He may not object. And if he does object..." She tilted her head fractionally. "Then I'll make a case," she said. "To whoever I need to make it to." He understood then what the cultural packet had been missing, what it meant to be named for clear water. It wasn't plainness. It wasn't transparency that made you invisible. It was the kind of clarity that ran all the way through, that didn't distort what it showed, that could take the full weight of what was poured into it without breaking. He raised his hand and settled it against her jaw, and she leaned into it with the steadiness of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Clear water," he said. She looked at him, the topaz eyes warm and direct and present. "Yes," she said, "that's me." She left the next morning. The courier shuttle was in perfect condition. Calder had serviced it himself the night before, because the flight back to the capital relay was 6 hours, and the hull plating on a Class 4 deserved to be seated correctly. He stood at the upper rail of Landing Bay 3 and watched the departure. She paused at the docking corridor door and looked back. He was visible from there, he knew, because he'd measured the sightline when he came up to the rail, habit operating independently of everything else. She raised her hand, a simple and precise gesture that was very much hers. He raised his. The shuttle lifted and went through the bay doors and was gone, and Marek Station continued its ordinary operations, and Calder went back to the workshop and opened the maintenance log for the day. The audit document was already in the station archive, already in the procurement queue for the junction upgrade, already in the reference file. 53 pages of exact, careful work, stamped with her name in the station records. He made a note in the active file, extended technical liaison request pending, projected return, 60–90 days. Then he got back to work. She was back in 61 days. The communication from the Emperor's office arrived 3 weeks after her departure, a formal authorization for extended outer ring technical liaison, Marak Station, indefinite duration, pending quarterly review. The phrasing was exactly what she'd predicted. The Emperor sends things to the outer ring because he doesn't want them. The authorization carried no ceremony. There was no delegation notice, no diplomatic formality, no honor drone. Just a filing. He logged the filing in the station administrative record and then sent a one-line message to the incoming shuttle manifest team, diplomatic technical liaison returning. Bay 3 standard. The shuttle arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Standard Class 4 courier, different vessel, this time, newer hull plating, perfectly aligned on all sides, which told him the capital maintenance crews were adequate. She came through the docking corridor with her shoulder bag and her tablet, and without the aide this time, which told him something else. He was waiting at the bottom of the Bay 3 stairs. She stopped 3 meters away and looked at him. The topaz eyes warm and direct, the copper hair slightly disordered from transit, the shoulder bag slightly overfull, as if she'd packed books again. "The hull is fine this time," he said. "I checked it before departure," she said. "Of course you did." They stood for a moment, the Bay 3 hum around them, the station in its ordinary rhythm. "The junction upgrade approval came through," he said. "Installation window is in 3 weeks. The sequencing model you designed, the procurement office wants to review it with you before they finalize the contractor schedule." "I'll read the current load data first," she said. "The model may need updating." "Probably," he agreed. She walked the 3 meters and stopped in front of him, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up slightly, which was becoming a specific detail of standing near her that he was aware of in the way you're aware of things you've stopped pretending you don't notice. "I told my father's office the station required an indefinite technical liaison," she said. "They agreed because they prefer me out here to having to explain where to put me." "Practical," he said. "I thought so." A pause. "I also told them the liaison would need to be logged under engineering records rather than diplomatic exchange." He looked at her. "Engineering records." "Diplomatic exchange doesn't produce station audits," she said. "Engineering records does." He was quiet for a moment. "Sira Velorin Keth, indefinite duration, engineering records, Marak Station." "That's a different designation," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." He picked up her bag. She didn't protest, which meant she'd already decided not to. They walked together out of Bay 3 and into the station's internal corridor, past the Level 4 junction and the turn toward the upper residential levels. And then at the next junction, without any discussion, both of them turned left instead of right, left being the service corridor, the lower ring, the way to Level 2. The workshop was as he'd left it, lit with the flat, honest light. Maintenance log open on the primary screen. The annotated junction map still on the wall of the plant room next door, their 2 handwritings overlapping in the margins. She put her bag down and sat on the stool at the secondary bench and opened her tablet. "What are you working on?" she said. He sat down at the primary bench. "The Dock 7 loading arm has been fine since the junction redistribution," he said. "But I want to run a 6-month load review before I sign off the maintenance record permanently." He pulled up the data. "And there's a secondary duct fault on Level 3 that showed up 2 weeks ago, different from the thermostat loop we fixed. I haven't traced it yet." "Secondary duct," she said. "Which section?" "Between nodes 14 and 16. She pulled up the schematic. He watched her eyes move across the data. The quick, precise tracking that meant she was already modeling it, already looking for the pattern that would tell her where the fault was accumulating. He turned back to the loading arm data and started the review. The workshop was quiet except for the station's hum and the soft sound of two people working. This was what it looked like, Calder thought. Not the formal dinner, not the plant room with its annotated maps, not the corridor with its precise declarations. This. Two people at adjacent benches, the flat, honest light, the data that told the truth if you knew how to read it, and the company of someone who knew how. He'd been doing this work for 14 years. He'd been good at it alone. He hadn't known, until 12 weeks ago, that there was a version of it that was better than that. He was learning it now. Node 15, she said, without looking up from her tablet. There's a micro gap in the thermal seal. The fault log shows temperature cycling. It's been opening and closing the gap with the day cycle. That's why it looks intermittent. He looked at the duct log. She was right. I'll have a crew on it tomorrow morning, he said. I can do it this afternoon, she said. Node 15 is accessible from the level 3 maintenance crawl. It's a 20-minute job. You've been in transit for 6 hours. She looked at him, the topaz eyes very direct. Yes, she said. And the seal is open right now, and the temperature cycle is going to start in 4 hours when the station goes to evening mode, and the gap is going to widen. He held her gaze for a moment. I'll get the equipment, he said. She was already standing. They went together down the service corridor to the level 3 maintenance crawl, and the thermal seal was exactly where she'd said it was, and the job took 19 minutes, and the station went into evening mode with a properly sealed duct on level 3, and a completed repair log entry and 2 names on it. Sierra Velorin Keth. Calder Voss. Marak Station, Engineering Records. The outer ring turned on in its ordinary rhythm, unremarkable and real, and the work continued.